and welcome into a new and improved, I guess, edition of Musings from the Mountains, the video podcast presented by WVSports.com. I am your host / managing editor of the website, Keenan Cummings, and we got a new sidekick, a new partner in the chair, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, hi. My name is Serre. I'm the new staff writer here, replacing the departed Pat Kotnick.
Rest in peace. Not really, but.
Hey, but while Pat may be gone, the beard stays.
Yeah, that seems to be a prerequisite. Mine is actually getting pretty out of control, but we'll work on that. I think some people like that. Mountaineers. Mountaineers are allowed to have beards. Let's jump into, I guess, a topic that is on everybody's mind right now. It's football. We might have football. I have to say might. I know some people have gotten mad at me that I say if and might a lot, but if you can tell me what's going to happen a couple of weeks from now, I want you to tell me lottery numbers as well, because things are very unpredictable right now. But for now, we might have football. West Virginia has the schedule to prove it. 10-game slate, 6 home games, 4 away games. Away game every month of the schedule, so you don't play any back-to-back. Pretty good setup, wouldn't you say, Jared?
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, we don't know, obviously, if a season will even start, let alone whether one will finish. In my mind, the early half of the schedule looks pretty good for the Mountaineers. Start off with Eastern Kentucky. They'll have a bit of a challenge with Oklahoma State early, but then, Baylor and Kansas probably up in the air games. I think my big concern is that second half of the schedule, just because the final 4 games they're playing Texas, TCU, Oklahoma, and Iowa State. And 3 of those teams were in the top 4 of the Big 12 preseason poll. So, yeah, I mean, the way it looks right now, if we have a season, the Mountaineers are really going to need a hot start to build that momentum up.
We'll get into predictions the closer towards September 12th we get, but off the cuff, what would you say is a productive season here? I think 6-4 is a home run for this team. Do you agree, disagree? What do you think?
Honestly, I mean, it makes me wonder with everything going on if Neil Brown gets another year 0, if you will. I mean, I don't think he'll need it. I don't anticipate this being a 9-1 football team, but I could see they play 10 games, so 5-5, 6-4. That's definitely not out of the question, and I think that would be considered a success given the circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. I think 6 wins, you're happy. You're not satisfied, obviously. You'd like to see more if you're a West Virginia fan, but I think the importance here is you continue to build. Their mantra is trust the climb. You want to continue to build, and we've all – I guess it's not fair to assume we – because I've never asked you this, but most people assume year 3 is going to be when West Virginia makes a serious challenge to the Big 12. But, hey, there's surprise teams every year. Who's to say it's not West Virginia? Possibly aiding that surprise is the fact West Virginia has brought in a boat full of transfers this offseason. Second year in a row that West Virginia has been able to do this. Dare I say this year even more impressive than last. West Virginia netted Tony Fields, graduate transfer from Arizona, had 287 tackles in 3 years, 3-year starter, started every single game from the time he arrived on campus in Tucson. West Virginia was able to get him. He's probably one of the premier, if not the premier, graduate transfers on the defensive side in all of college football. So you're adding him to the mix. Zach Dobson, a wide receiver. He'll probably have to apply for a waiver. I've heard he could be a graduate transfer, but it seems at this point he's probably going to have to apply for a waiver. So he's got 2 years left. If he's able to play, that's going to help him. We'll have more on that on the site this week, thanks to Jared. We'll get into that later. But you got him, and you got some other guys too. Scotty Young, another guy that's probably going to have to apply for a waiver, but if he gets it, immediate help in the secondary. Another 3-year starter from Arizona. West Virginia hit the transfer market hard. They also got some guys to walk on, which is kind of crazy because they're high caliber guys. Another 3-year starter in Tyler Sumter. From Troy, the punter. That was one of the biggest concerns. And one of my biggest concerns, seems like I'm always asking Neil about special teams, but, they have a punter now, a guy that has experience. Bryce Brand, an outside linebacker, can do a lot of different things, rush the passer. And I'm not even mentioned probably physically the biggest addition they had in Jaquay Hubbard, an offensive lineman. They had to add an offensive lineman. Another guy that's probably going to be one of those guys that needs a waiver to play immediately, but he's a freshman. At worst, he's going to have 3 years left, could potentially have 4. So a lot of transfers into the program, and it continues to play with that belief that Neil Brown has, adding people creatively. They came into this with 2 scholarships and added 6 guys. So there's a lot of mixing and moving and things to make it work, but they do make it work. And I think it's interesting that West Virginia continues to add these players that, some of these guys were high impact players. These aren't guys that were looking for opportunities. Some of these guys were high impact players. And even if you look at some of those guys, last year, take Reuben Jones, for example, hardly saw the field at Michigan, was a huge part of what West Virginia did. Same can be said for George Campbell. So they've picked the right guys and they've made it work, haven't they, Jared?
Yeah, they definitely have a phenomenal group of guys coming in. Really got to give props to Coach Brown and the rest of the staff just for their recruiting efforts, especially with the pandemic going on. But I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the first 2. Tony Fields is just a phenomenal linebacker, probably one of the top that was in the transfer portal this offseason. Second on the team in Arizona last year in tackles. Definitely a big upgrade on the defensive side for the Mountaineers, not to mention, the past connection with Jamila Dye. That definitely helps, especially even if Scotty Young gets to play. It's just more people getting added to the puzzle that already have a bit of a chemistry. And then also Zach Dobson again, filling the role that Tevin Bush used to play, of just kind of the guy that's just a little weasel moving around, getting through everybody, getting open. And also, Jaquay Hubbard, I believe he was a 4-star
Yes.
Coming out. And, you can never not accept a 4-star that wants to come play for your program, not even a 4-star offensive tackle. So they definitely, if there's a season, I expect most of these guys to play an impact right away. I mean, we're still waiting on waivers for guys like Scotty Young and whatnot, but they're definitely at positions of need, and they're definitely going to have an impact come week 1.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing with Fields too is, he's a true inside type linebacker. You can play him at Mike or Will. I know West Virginia counts their Will on the outside, but one of those traditional linebacker spots, and it frees up a guy like maybe Jared Bartlett, who added 22 pounds in the offseason, not bad weight either, to play more in his traditional role at band. It gives West Virginia more options on the edge, and it just really allows them to mix and match more, as opposed to forcing guys to play positions that maybe they're not as comfortable with. Speaking of guys, Neil Brown's talked a lot. He pretty much every time we meet with him, he gives us an update on guys that have impressed, guys that have stood out in practice. Scott Young, one of those guys. Obviously, as we mentioned, still waiting on a waiver, but he's one. Sam James is a name that I think we've heard every single time, and that's good because consistency-wise, that was his biggest issue as a redshirt freshman. He'd have highs and then he'd have lows. Finding that middle ground was going to be that next step for him. I think that's one of the names to me that I've been encouraged hearing a lot. Some of the young offensive linemen as well. We've heard Parker Moore, Brandon Yates a few times. Anybody to you that's really stood out, that you think kind of maybe needed to take that step, or maybe you're just happy to hear their names for the sake of if West Virginia is going to make another step as a football team?
Yeah, I always love to hear the name of freshmen, just because, it's always great to have not just depth, but depth that can jump in right away and help out. In Neil Brown's presser earlier today, he was talking about Daryl Porter Jr. as one of those guys who stepped in due to the split squad. He's going up against Sam James in practice, and said he looks really, really good for, being a freshman coming in right away. So I'm really excited for him. Not sure how much run he'll get, given the amount of players they've got back there. But I think given last year, he'll definitely see some playing time as long as we have a season. And also Sam Brown, I'm really interested in, just because, like you said, we heard his name a lot for the first couple days of practice. It's a deep group at wide receiver, so I think he may struggle to, being a freshman, it's ultimately a numbers game. But I think we could see something big out of him in years to come.
Yeah, I'm big on Sam Brown. Anybody that's read my work or followed me since he was recruited, I think that he is going to be a star player at West Virginia. if not this year, probably not this year with the depth chart as you mentioned, but eventually. He's physically looks the part. Akeem Mesidor is another guy I really, really like on defense, have since he was being recruited. Drayshawn Miller is a guy I felt like I have to mention as well. When you look at those guys on the roster that you don't want to say now or never because that's not fair. Sometimes it takes guys to their senior years. Sometimes it takes guys an opportunity, but he was hurt last year. And if he is able to keep this level of play heading into the season with Nick Troy on the other side, I think West Virginia is feeling a lot better about their cornerback room. But thank you. Thank you all for tuning in again. It's a new edition, but we're having fun with it. We're going to be working on it. We'll try to bring this to you once or twice a week, moving forward, sometimes even more depending on what happens, what developments occur in fall camp and other things. But we're almost towards depth chart season, guys. We're almost there. And that's when things get interesting, as you all know. Practice is really supposed to ramp up next week, start having contact, get the physical elements that have not been going on, and we're going to start putting depth charts together. SZN, capital letters, depth chart season. Thanks for tuning in again. This has been another edition of Musings from the Mountains.